Welcome to Friday Night Firelight, presented by Mortal Up. I'm Brian Brody, your host, sponsored by Nutrient Survival at nutrientsurvival.com, and of course, Firebugs at Firebugs, that's BUGGZ.com.
Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to another version of Friday Night Firelight. Of course, along for the ride, along for the warmth, I'm Brian Brody. And I want to thank Nutrient Survival and Firebugs and the fun that my family and I have gathered around the Firebugs setup of the fire pit and everything that goes along with it, cooking our Nutrient Survival food. Now that the weather is finally starting to turn, it's a little cooler. It was 48 degrees here this morning. So just perfect time of the year to be enjoying both Nutrient Survival and their fine wares and, of course, Firebugs. All right, I want to jump right into it tonight because we're talking about your cover story. Now, AKA, another word, right? Cover story is your programming. And before you think to yourself, you go, well, Brian, I don't have much programming. You stop and go, well, wait a minute. We were given a name without a vote. We were given kind of like our initial identity without a vote. Right? So we were given a little bit of programming. If you call me Brian and I call you Ted or I call you Susan, whatever names we go by, that's a little bit of programming. That's a part of our cover story. But what happens, and I'm working on a new book now called Soaring and 60. Well, a little more than 60, right? I've celebrated my 60th birthday a few times. But Soaring in 60. And as I've done this, as I've sat down to craft some of these things, I've started to really think about what separates a 60-plus-year-old mind, the wisdom that comes, that ripens into a 60-year-old mind, along with what some of the wisdom, some of the knowledge that may not accompany you and me until we reach the ripe old age of 60, until we really can experience the golden, making them our golden years. So I started thinking about our cover story. Now, years ago, good golly, 1983, let's say, so quite a few years ago, when I started in law enforcement, I was drawn. As soon as I graduated from the academy, all I wanted to do was be a detective. All I wanted to do was be a criminal investigator. And I had the ability to learn from a pretty sharp guy, I won't mention his name in case he doesn't want to be outed, but a really sharp investigator. And I built my first fingerprint kit. You know, I put in some of the powders, I put in the brushes, I put in the tape, I put in the super glue, everything I needed. So if I responded to a crime scene, I could do, and I still remember my very first one, I could do what I needed to get the fingerprints. So, right, if two things come in contact, one is taken away, one is left behind. My mentor said, you got to be smart enough to figure out what's left behind. And there was the fingerprint, easy for me to say, fingerprint kit. So all these years later, you go, Brian, well, what does that have to do with me and my golden years? What does it have to do with me and my cover story? Well, by the time you and I reach probably 50, maybe 55, most certainly 60, you start to look at your cover story and you think to yourself, is it really my cover story? Or was it crafted by the people around me? Was it crafted by some of my peers, some of my childhood friends? Was it crafted by my parents? Was it crafted by my teachers, my college professors if you went to college? Was it crafted by some of our shop teachers? So our cover story as we get to be a certain age is either authentic or inauthentic. It's something that we believe that we are to our core, or, unfortunately for some, it's a fabricated cover story, right? And in order to be to the point where you can enjoy the last portions of our life, look, I'm not going to live to be 120 years old, so to say my life is half over is a little diluted. I'm hoping it's 2/3 over. I'm hoping I hit 90, but you never can tell. Who's to say? All I'm suggesting is that I want to spend the last 30 years, as maybe you do too, or whatever portion you and I are going to be here for that last 30 years, I want to spend that portion of my life making sure that the cover story is one that I've crafted, not plagiarized based on the wishes of other people, based on other people's opinion as to what I should be. And you look around now from some of the narrative in the media. You look around at the narrative in our mirrors, let's say, which is why you hear me say all the time, your mirror is your best friend. You got to stare into your mirror long enough for it to stare back at you. But suppose that narrative, whether it's from outside or from inside, suppose that narrative isn't one of the most authentic things. So let's look at that. What happens? Stress, anxiety, sadness, depression. Most certainly, you look at all the craziness going around surrounding the Wuhan wallop, all these other things done to separate us from our sense of self. And I think one of the things that begins to show the cracks in your cover story is fear. Now, the flip side of fear, I think, is one of self-respect. So, now that we're focusing on self-respect for just a second, the ultimate in self-respect is to making sure your cover story goes more than skin deep, making sure your cover story goes all the way through you, and it is who you truly are as a human being. As I say, when you mortal up. Now, taken me a lot of years of studying comparative religion, philosophy, psychology, the classics, all of it. And I have to tell you that my opinion, pretty straightforward, I suspect, is that when I talk about mortal up, it's with the concept of Genesis in mind. And it doesn't have to be the Judeo-Christian Islamic understanding of Genesis and the fall. Every religion has their own version of it. But the fall is when we fell from the garden, from the godlike personality that we were, right? From that creative energy that fuels the entire universe. When we fell from there into a lower grade of self-respect, into a lower vision of ourselves. So when I talk about mortal up, it's to return to the garden, to the pre-fall garden. Now, I don't believe, and you've heard me say before, it cost me a lot of flack, that any paradise run by a God that would threaten you with hell is no heaven at all. So I don't believe in the story that we're somehow tainted or dirty or broken or maybe fragmented, but we're none of these things because our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother talked our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather into eating a piece of fruit in the garden. Don't believe it. What I'm simply saying, though, is that all religions, all mythologies, all stories about human past talks about a fall from connectedness, right? Even if you look at the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and the piece of fruit and the serpent, wow, why do you want to eat this piece of fruit? Well, I want to understand the dichotomy between good and evil. Well, if you are that yin-yang, if you are a blend of both good and evil, the moment you decide you want to pick one from the other, A from B, left from right, up from down, the moment you decide you need to pick one of those things, you begin the fall. Because then it's not up to you and me to decide, not always up to you and me to decide. Are we taking in other people's opinions as to good and evil, black and white, up, down, left, right? You get me. So in order to return to the garden, which I think, the kingdom of heaven is spread upon the face of the earth, and men and women do not see it. We don't see it. We're already in that flow. But there's a dichotomy. We see ourselves as beings. Our cover story is that we're beings disconnected from that flow. When in fact, you and I are that flow. And that's what it takes to start to craft a cover story that allows you to mortal up and get back into that sense of paradise, get back into that sense of self-respect long before you believed in the dichotomy of you and another. You are that one. What is it? Tat tvamasi, thou art that. Aradivam arachet from the Sanskrit. None but by a God shall a God be worshipped. So I'm simply suggesting that our lack of self-respect, and it continues to spiral out of control. Just look at all the mashugana going on in the world today. And my theory, if you want to hear it, is that if you and I don't have self-respect, how can we learn to respect others around us? If we don't have an overwhelming vat of self-respect, if we don't understand what respect even is, to the being that we see when we see our reflection in the mirror, how can we possibly communicate that sense of respect to another? Maybe that's what the fall meant. Maybe that's why, the whole Cain and Abel story shortly thereafter, one caps the other. Maybe that's why. Cain went all Meshuggah. Poor Abel gets whacked because Cain had lost. He chose one or the other, this sense of connection to the ultimate in self-respect, the ultimate, the divine, however you define it. So I'm here to suggest that Mortal Up is nothing more to return to that pre-fall energy that is the Garden of Eden, that is spread upon the face of the earth, that spread through the cosmos, but you and I, from time to time, forget to see it. And I think all ills in the world, with all due respect to all the different religions of my friends and family, we're connected to the divine. We are a portion of the divine. We're a satellite office of the divine long before the fall. So when I talk about Mortal Up, when people say, oh, well, I want to get a higher consciousness. Well, what's wrong with the consciousness you already have once you remember to be a human being and not a human getting? I think you and I get distracted, and we've begun to believe the part of the cover story that says we have to be a getting. We constantly have to want. We constantly have to get more things to stuff ourselves with. We constantly have to get all those other things in order to feel fulfilled, in order to feel a healthy level, as if all the crap, all the baubles, all the trinkets, all the whatnot, all the stuff begins to fill us up. So the more it fills us up, the more fulfilled you and I seem. Now, in the inverse, if you're a human being, right, Shakespeare, to be or not to be, that is the question. To be or not to be, if you're a human being, you realize you come pre-equipped. Those natural resources, everything you've ever needed, you've always had when you remember who you ultimately are. And that's all I'm suggesting. When it comes to Mortal Up, is to remember who you ultimately are. What if the amnesia of who you ultimately are is running so rampant in your mind that it's easy to forget? Kind of like my sunglasses on the top of my head when I go out. Have you ever done this? You ever run around with your car keys and you're holding them like on a ring finger, and then you go, where are my keys? And you go, oh, they're my keys. Right? So what if our sense of amnesia is what compels us, or at least permits us, to be evil, to be mean, to be psychopaths when it comes to dealing with some of the other people around us? If you and I can't remember the lesson of ultimate self-respect, there's no way we can be expected to communicate respect to someone else. And I think that ultimately when we reach a ripe old age of our later years, we begin to realize that there's more to life than a division. There's more to life than acquiring all this crap that you and I aren't going to get to take with us. Right? We've got all these baubles, all these trinkets, all this whatnot. We don't get to take it with us. And why is that? Because I don't think it's all that important. It's not nearly as important as spending some time to remember who you ultimately are, listening to your gut, listening to your own heartbeat. Now, I want to talk about aphantasia very, very quickly. We've got about 9 minutes left, but if you've been following along, you know that one of the side effects I've had from multiple brain surgeries is the aphantasia seems to continue to grow in me, and that means the inability of my mind to make pictures. I can't anymore. It gets more difficult to see things in my mind's eye. But here's what's happened. As my ability to see things, which you could say, well, Brian, look, it's the visible spectrum of light, which is just a smidgen, just a sliver of the overall spectrum that's available in the universe. But is my ability to make pictures, that that spectrum in my mind diminishes, what I've found is that a kinesthetic, my gut sets, my intuition, my instinct begins to rise as those visions begin to fall. So when I find myself in a scenario, I don't see a way out, I feel a way out. It's not about making a picture, but it's about allowing that profound instinctual or intuitional vibration to rise into me. And it seems like any other muscle in the body, the more the vision wastes, the more this kinesthetic feeling in me grows. So I find myself at forks in the road waiting to see how I'm going to feel about where I'm pulled. I said to a neighbor today, it's not unlike Ariadne's thread for Theseus when he went in to cap the Minotaur, almost pulled to the right decision. I can't see the picture in my mind. I can't see the right decision, but I can feel it. And, we talked about the labyrinth of life, another, a little more poetic version of what I call the myriads. We're in, here in the garden, if you will, the myriads are all the possibilities, all the, they say the multiverse, the multi-universes, all the possibilities within the myriads. I'm able to feel my way through them as opposed to seeing my way through them. And I'd offer that maybe that's one of the reasons that why, as we get older, our sight goes a little bit. And when we start thinking about wisdom, we're thinking about the wisdom of letting our spine, letting our navel, letting our gut, our instinct, our intuition, letting it direct the course. Let it decide where we jump into the flow and allow ourselves to navigate or be navigated by the very flow. Which is why I always say magnify the moment. What if we allow the moment to navigate us? What possibly could be the outcome? And I know that I've dedicated, at least for me, however many minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, decades, right? However much time I have left. A part of the wisdom of old age is reeling, let the flow. What was that old commercial from Go Greyhound and leave the driving to us? Let the flow dictate the course of your life. Instead of being a getting and go, I need to get this done and this done and this done and this done and this done, what if you take a little bit of time to inhale, magnify the moment, and simply be? To be or not to be, I vote to be. And I think that's the wisdom of old age. Now, if you think I'm wrong, I would just try it. I would just say, what happenstance, what synchronicity, what has the universe, what is your circumstance provided to you in this particular moment in all of time that would dictate your next step forward, wherever that is? And I believe that's the wisdom of old age. That's the wisdom of mortal up, because everything that you and I think we need was already provided for us in this garden before the fall, where we had to dictate what was good and what was bad. Well, what if it's all good and bad? What's the flip side? What if the Chinese were right with the yin-yang? What if you and I decide to let flow dictate where we go next, where we throw our gut in and let it go? So that's what I've been thinking about when I talk about the cover story. What if the cover story blocks you and I from the flow? What if the cover story is what blocks you and I from the garden? What if the cover story is what we're so busy, the cover story that we've crafted for ourselves, the persona, the mask, right? From the Greek tragedies, the mask. What if that's blocking you and me from feeling the flow? And I'm simply here to suggest that when you reach a certain age, you want to make certain that you're crafting your own cover story. It's that very simple. All right, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Speaking of 20-minute victories, you know how I love to keep them to 20 minutes. I want to thank Nutrient Survival, of course, Firebugs for being sponsors of the show, and I look forward to seeing you next week. As is always the case, we're going to go ahead, throw the flames up so that you can see what is the fire saying to you. Good night, everybody.